That's all right with our professor here.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we'll just be very, very informal this time. And I'm gonna, we have President Saunders as our guest faculty this time. Uh-oh, no, we're gonna have to mute because then
They should mute.
All participants
yeah,
are
I think
now
we better
in
mute,
listen-only
otherwise we're gonna
mode.
hear everybody else's side conversations. We have, but we'll unmute periodically to get questions on each segment of this, of today's class. We have Professor Saunders, also known as President Saunders, here with us today. And
Am I getting paid for this?
I think the answer is no. If you were retired.
No respect, no respect.
I mean, the truth is, if you were retired, you would get a stipend, but you are definitely not retired. So Professor and President Saunders is our guest faculty today. And we, as Renee sent out a couple of days ago, there are several areas of AFSCME history and experience that we want to tap Lee's experience to share with us. But in order to give him a chance to eat some pizza, even though obviously Lee is somebody who needs no introduction, I'm going to make an introduction anyway.
Okay.
Lee comes to us with 3.5 decades of the AFSCME history under his belt, and he's now he's kind of uniquely qualified to be here because as I think everybody knows, he has both the experience of starting here in the headquarters and also running major parts of the union in the field. So he sees the organization's history from both aspects. And I think that makes him different from everybody else that we've had here, except with the exception of McEntee, who also had both the field and the council and the international union experience. So that's one thing about him. The second thing is that he started young, so his
4 years old.
well, anyway, the official biography probably says when he started, but so his the first thing that we're going to cover are reflections that Lee has from having been an international union staffer and coming in here as a young guy, and I'm going to ask him questions that are in order to bring out what the learning the craft, learning the ropes experience was like for him. So we're going to cover 3 areas. Reflections on what it's like to be an AFSCME staffer from Lee's eyes. That's one. Then we're going to stop, take questions from unmute, let people throw questions in there. Number 2 is District Council 37, the 4+ years experience he had as the administrator of that district council when it was in harsh shape, and then stop that, and then we're going to talk about the problem of AFSCME as a municipal employee union, distinct from what we've already covered with Wasserman and with McEntee, where we almost exclusively talked about the union as an organization of state employees. It's a much different organization in the municipalities, and now we have, of course, our common experience of fighting to save the union in Detroit, one of the big cities that Lee had lots of direct experience with long before it got into the shape that it's in now, or while it was on its way. So that you've had a chance to take a few bites of your pizza.
I have.
I can tell you that and I think I've mentioned this to you, but the interest of the class participants is pretty sharp because they're getting an insight into the union's background that there's no other place to get it than tapping the people who've who've helped bring us to this point. I don't think any other union has ever done this. And when I've told people from other unions that we're doing it, they look at it with a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of envy, that we're or at least making this stab at trying to recapture some of the history. So without further ado, let's get right into it. You arrived into the union in the mid-70s, not so long out of college. We've heard stories from the people who claim to have hired you. Wasserman told one version of that.
He lied.
But I'd like to focus on who were your mentors, to what extent you learned the trade by being sent out on assignments and told, figure it out once you get there, and what that was like and what it looks like in retrospect.
Well, let me just open it up before getting into those questions. And I think that it's important, some of you possibly have heard this story, but my wife and I were living in Columbus, Ohio. I had graduated from Ohio State, graduate school in political science at Ohio State. I had met her in undergraduate school. We got married in Columbus, and I was working for the Ohio Bureau of Employment Services after graduating. And about 3 years into that work, my wife and I sat down and talked about what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives and how we wanted to explore more than just the Midwest. I was originally from Cleveland. She was from Columbus. And we wanted to get out before having any children and take some risks, take some calculated chances as far as doing some creative things for our careers. We had nailed down 3 cities. Paul knows this.
I just learned this day before last week.
We talked about 3 cities that we wanted to move to in 1977. In the fall of 1977, we were looking at Atlanta. We were looking at Houston, Texas, and I'm so happy we didn't go there. And we were looking at Washington, D.C. We had a lot of friends and family in Washington. Knew quite a few folks in Atlanta. Didn't know anybody really in Houston. But if you recall, in the mid to late 70s, those were really the 3 cities for young African American professionals where a lot of folks were moving to because of the opportunities that were there. We ultimately decided that we wanted to be on the East Coast, so we moved to Washington. Really we didn't have any jobs at all. We had interviewed long distance, and that wasn't working out too well, so we saved up, and I remember talking to her family and talking to my family saying that we wanted to move to Washington, and they said, well, do you have a job? And I said, no, and neither does Lynn, my wife, but it was something that we just felt that we wanted to do and needed to break away from the Midwest. A lot of folks were shocked that we did something like that. It was the best move, obviously, that we ever made. But a lot of folks thought that we could be comfortable in Columbus, which we could have been. We could have been comfortable, had a comfortable life, raised our kids in Columbus, Ohio. But we also knew that there was something more and something else that we needed to experience outside of Ohio. So we moved here in '77, and Lynn was able to get a job relatively quickly because at that time people were still using typewriters, and those old electric typewriters, and she could type like 150 words a minute. It was unbelievable. I never saw anything like it. And so people picked her up right away. So she got an administrative position, even though she had graduated from Ohio State also. And then that gave me some time to look around and talk to folks and be interviewed for a variety of jobs. It essentially took me about 6 months to get a job at the consulting firm in Virginia. It was a place called Advanced Technology. They had a lot of federal contracts, mostly with the Department of Navy, Department of Defense, dealing with logistical systems. And because they were getting a lot of contracts with the federal government, they didn't have any minorities on staff. So they interviewed me, and they said, looks like a bright guy. He's got his college degrees, and he could probably fit in well here, and we can teach him, the ins and outs, even though I didn't have any knowledge of logistical systems. So I started working there, and really wasn't looking around anymore. I had dropped my resume off at AFSCME, and it floated around, but I got the call back saying we really don't have any openings at this time. So I was working at this consulting firm, and one evening I got home, and it was about 7:30, and this is a story you probably heard from Wasserman. He called me. Don Wasserman called me and said that they were looking at their files, and that they were starting to hire again in the Research and Collective Bargaining Department, and thought that I had an interesting background coming from the state. I worked for the Bureau of Employment Services, as I said, and I negotiated contracts around the state with what we called the prime sponsors, which were the major counties and cities in Ohio regarding the CEDAR program. So he asked me to come in, and I said that I really wasn't looking for a job, but I would come in and I would talk to anybody, which I did, and that's where it started. I remember going back to my consulting firm, and this was a pretty conservative place, and told them that I was leaving, and they were in shock. And they immediately tried to convince me that I should stay. As a matter of fact, even attempted to bump up my salary and give me a new package. And I said, no, I really wanted to leave and do something that I think I really would enjoy. And I never will forget the president of the Advanced Technology. I was talking to him because he was trying to keep me there. And he said, well, where are you going? I mean, just where are you going? And I told him I was going to work for a labor union. And I remember the statement that he made was, you're leaving here to work for a union? I said, yeah. And he said, well, I don't want to have to tell you what I think about unions. I said, well, I don't ever believe that I asked you. So that was that. So I started working at AFSCME in the Research and Collective Bargaining Department, and was exposed to a lot of things. And Don Wasserman and all of you, I guess, saw him, met him when he was here, about a month and a half ago?
No,
As a matter of fact, I had drinks with him the other night. We stay in contact. And he really mentored me and took me under his wing in research and collective bargaining, and exposed me to everything that department had to offer, but also felt that it was important that I be exposed to other functions of the union. So I started doing budget analyses, doing wage comparisons, all those other kinds of things. The research department was not as large as it is now. And started going into the field. But I would travel with him sometimes. I would travel with the director of research. It was kind of split, or she was the assistant director then. It was Linda Lampkin. And I would participate in negotiations providing budget information, talking about the fact that the employer had the ability to pay in certain areas, even though they were crying broke all the time. And I got to be pretty well known in doing that all across the country, going to counties and cities, because that's where we really did most of the analyses. We did them for the local governments, to the point where people were asking for me to come in and not only help with analyzing the budget, but based upon them seeing me in action around the table, they felt that I had the ability to negotiate with the employer and to represent our members and represent the union well. So I really was on a fast track, moved on a fast track, and started negotiating contracts in Detroit, Philadelphia, Newcastle County, Delaware, a number of other areas across the country. But it seemed that I would always be drawn back to Philadelphia and Detroit because I had relationships there, and people trusted me, and they thought that my abilities were strong. And Wasserman really gave me the ability to do that. I mean, he let me go and cut that cord where I was really out on my own. But he had given me obviously some training, and given me the lay of the land as far as the union was concerned. But he also believed that you had to experience it by fire. And you had to go into situations and use your gut and use your common sense, develop the relationships necessary to do the kinds of things that we needed to do in those negotiations. And I think I created the ability and the relationships across the country where, again, folks were saying, we'd like Lee to come in and help us negotiate contracts, which I did. By the same token, research and collective bargaining was just a part of what the union had to offer. And there was a guy named P.J. Champa, and I'm sure that many of you have read about him. He was another mentor. He was at one time the director of field services, and then he was the judicial panel chair. And he was responsible for, at that time, major organizing campaigns in the union. And Don said, well, you're doing great as far as getting out and handling some of these negotiations and doing the budget analyses. He said, but I think you need to get your feet wet as far as organizing is concerned. So we're going to assign you to PJ. And the first organizing campaign I went on was in the state of New Jersey. And I remember the first meeting that I had with Champa, and he had a reputation in the union inside of headquarters and outside of headquarters. The first meeting I had with him was with about 7 or 8 other staff. Steve Fantazzo was in the same meeting. And all of us were being shipped to New Jersey to help with the state organizing campaign. We were organizing, it was really 2 campaigns. The first campaign was against CWA, and I can't remember the other union. The second campaign was us and CWA, and we ended up losing because we didn't have such a great relationship and a great reputation in Jersey. But I remember PJ coming to me and saying, and coming to all of us, and he looked in the room, and there were 7 or 8 of us in the room, and he said, I look in this room, and I see half an organizer, and there are 8 of us in the room. So that kind of just, kind of blew. I mean, anything that we thought how good we were doing kind of just took the air right out of us. And he said, but you're going to learn, and you're going to learn with some good people. So we went off to New Jersey, and there were some very, very strong organizers there that had been around the union for a long time, and they took us under their wings. And we traveled around with them. At that time, we weren't doing a lot of knocking on doors. We were meeting at the work sites and after work and talking with the potential members. But again, it was just another piece, another portion, another part of learning about this union and learning about what it does. Those were the 2 experiences in research and collective bargaining, with me being exposed to negotiations and also working on different organizing campaigns. New Jersey was one. The state of Ohio was another when we were organizing state employees after we got collective bargaining rights there. A very large campaign in Indiana. A lot of us went to Indiana to organize. Paul was there to organize state workers. We brought in not only national union staff, but staff from affiliates and rank and filers from all over the country. I mean, those are things that really exposed me, that really built a foundation for me to understand what the union was about, not only within headquarters, but I firmly believe that you've got to have an anchor and you've got to have a foundation in the field. And you've got to understand what our members are dealing with every single day. And the only way you do that is to relate to them and talk to them and be with them and develop relationships with them. So that was the beginning. And then I have a variety of other kinds of experiences, but I must admit that that Don and Linda and PJ were very instrumental in really developing me and forming the person who I am now.
Well, let's take questions on this. We could throw it open too. People could question from.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Anybody want to put a question out on the table? There you go, Doug.
So how has organizing changed since you were out in the field?
Well, organizing
What it
has
is
changed,
now,
and
yeah.
bargaining has
Well-
changed, quite honestly. I mean, it's organizing, when I was doing it, as I said, we didn't really knock on doors, okay? We didn't go around and knock on folks' doors. We tried to catch them at the work site. We could set up tent in the cafeterias in the state buildings. They wouldn't kick us out. I mean, we would control the yard, as we would say, and we would just sit down and we would talk to people. It was that personal relationship which never changes, but it was a different way of doing things. We didn't have all the technology that we have now. I must admit that we didn't have a sophisticated rating system. I mean, you just followed your gut as far as talking to folks and trying to figure out where they might be. So the basics were the same, Doug, but all of the new technology that we have now and knocking on doors and the maps that we have and rating those individuals. We really didn't do that in the beginning. It was all about developing strong relationships and then having those folks who you develop strong relationships introduce you to other people so you could talk to them. Negotiations are completely different too, and that's one of the areas that I really enjoyed working and doing within the union. I mean, I just like to give and take and trying to think of what your next move is going to be. I remember when we were in Franklin County and we were negotiating a welfare department contract, and we just overwhelmed. We just overwhelmed the employer because they weren't ready for us. I mean, we were a step ahead of them, I think, in the 80s, in the early 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, where we could really beat up on the boss and they'd give in. They really would. I mean, they'd give in. In a lot of the areas, at times were good. They didn't know how to deal with some of the information that we were coming back and confronting them with, and they would just cave. I mean, quite honestly, I remember the state contract. After we finished organizing the state in Ohio, I was involved in the first state contract. We had 4 head negotiators. It was me, it was Don Wasserman, Linda Lamkin, Tom King. We actually had 5, and a guy named Russ Murray who headed up the OCSCA then. And we would do round robins. And once one of us would get tired, then another one would come up, and they'd start negotiating. And there was only one guy from the state that was responsible for organizing. And I remember one that we were sitting, and Tom King, who used to be the director of field services, was at the head table, and we were beating the living shit out of the state. We really were. I mean, they were just outclassed. And this guy gets up, and he stands up and he starts yelling, "I can't take this anymore. I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm pulling my team." And we're saying, "What did we do? We didn't do anything," which we hadn't. But he was just overwhelmed. I mean, because we just kept on just hammering them all the time. And we came prepared. We had our statistics, we had our facts. They didn't come as fully prepared as we did. Now, those times are over with now. I mean, they caught up real quick. But I remember when we settled that first state contract in Ohio, I went to Minnesota to help negotiate the state contract. And the head negotiator in the state of Minnesota came up to me when I first got there, and he said, "Let me tell you something, Lee." He said, "This is not Ohio, and you are not going to rape us the way that you did in Ohio. We are not going to let that happen." So I said, "Okay." So, I mean, it's changing. New technology has changed the way you do things. The gathering of more information so you can make assessments properly. The home visits as far as organizing. But, some of the stuff is just basic one-on-one organizing and talking to folks and getting to know people and talking about the importance of belonging to something that's bigger than one individual. And that's what we did.
Seth?
Does it feel like to you like the power dynamic has
All
changed?
participants are now in listen-only mode.
I've seen studies that show when unions, especially in the public sector, bargain at a table with the employer, the union wins more than their share. And that may be because of unreasonable employer demands. It may be because the unions just are more realistic about how to do the negotiation, whereas employers being more political. But do you think that the relative strength at the bargaining table has changed, which is why maybe some of these folks are trying to just take the table away?
No, I think that they come more prepared, no question. And I think that what we're confronted with and what we're faced with is completely different than the negotiations that took place in the 80s or even the beginning of the 90s, where, I mean, you're dealing with a number of crises. You're dealing with pensions, you're dealing with health insurance, you're dealing with economies within state and local governments that are collapsing, and the folks don't have the dough. And you've got to be creative as far as how to deal with that. But they're coming better prepared to the table, make no mistake about it. I mean, with them not coming unprepared, that's not happening anymore. I mean, but what's also happening is that we're in some very, very dire circumstances and dire straits, which forces us to be creative, forces us to maybe accept some things that we normally wouldn't accept, negotiate away some things that we normally wouldn't negotiate away. But those are the signs of the times. Now, that can be difficult when you've got a committee and that committee wants, they don't want to they don't want to have takebacks. They believe that you should always be able to get more. And you've got to, it's not only an educational process with the employer, but some of the hardest negotiations takes place with your own members and with that committee, as far as what's real and what's not real and what's possible to get and what's not possible to get. So the dynamic clearly has changed and the power relationship has changed substantially. No question.
Those first contracts that you were involved negotiating, the huge AFSCME bargaining committees, is that a typical thing? I mean, I'd come from a private sector union. We did the national meatpacking agreement. We had a committee of 8 rank and file leaders and the officers came to AFSCME, and we were elected in a bargaining committee of 80 or 200.
Well, in Ohio for the first contract, I think we had a bargaining committee. Now, the bargaining committee was the overall committee that set the proposals after a number of meetings. And we had close to 500 people on that bargaining committee. On the negotiating committee, which was a committee that actually went in to negotiations, we had to negotiate at the Ohio State Fairgrounds because we had 245 people on our team. And the state brought in about 200. So you had close to 500 people sitting in the fairgrounds. Now, clearly, I mean, certain people talked, but it could get unruly sometimes. And our folks loved it. I mean, because they participated in it, they were a part of it. But we knew that that was going to be one time and one time only, being a first contract, we were going to have that many people, because it almost made it completely, not completely impossible, but it made it very, very tough for us to reach a settlement, because you had so many folks there and they had their own ideas and they had their own thoughts about what we should be doing with the first contract and what we should be doing with the state, to the point, quite honestly, where we had to have a number of side agreements, negotiations with the state, and then bring it back to the full committee, because that's the only way that we were going to move things. But I mean, the numbers have, went down in Ohio after that. In Detroit, when I was involved in city negotiations there, I guess it was every local president in the city, and I think we had 16 or 18 locals, so that was the bargaining team there. And the same with Philadelphia, where it was every local president within 33 was represented. So, I mean, I can tell you some stories about negotiations, from people putting guns on the table to getting punched in the mouth. I mean, it was fun. It got to a point, especially in Detroit and Philadelphia, where I spent a lot of my time, where it was a normal occurrence for somebody to get jumped on. I remember we were trying to ratify a contract one time, and for the folks that say that our people have not suffered in Detroit, that they have not given up anything, even in the 80s, we were doing concession bargaining in Detroit, because the city was starting to feel the effects of the auto industry picking up, and manufacturing base moving out of the city and going overseas. And I had come up with what they call, and they still kid me about this, the folks that are still around. It was a wage formula where our members would not get a wage increase unless the revenues hit a certain level. And if the revenues of the city did not hit a certain level, then our folks would not get an increase. In the first year, they didn't get an increase at all. The second year, I think they got maybe, it wasn't even 1%. I mean, but that was a sign of the times. We had a couple of strikes when I was up there, and Coleman Young was the mayor, who was a character. I remember he kicked me out of the city one time and told his security people that they were to take me back to the airport and send me back to Washington, D.C. And we had some very, very interesting times, but it made it fun. I mean, and you never knew what to expect, but I mean, that's a part of our union. I mean, and again, you've got to get down with what our members think and where they live every single day in the neighborhoods that they come up in. And that makes you understand and realize the importance of this institution and what we are able to do together for them, as far as raising, hopefully, for the most part, the quality of life for our members and their families. I mean, as I said, now we're struggling. Now we're fighting because these negotiations are much more difficult. Organizing is more difficult because the employer not only has become more sophisticated as bargaining, but as far as bargaining, but they become more sophisticated as far as organizing workers are concerned. And that's not easy. It's not easy anymore. The way that it was, and some would say it's never been easy, but to tell you the truth, it was a lot easier than what it is now. But that just adds to our resolve as far as considering and developing new ways to do things. That's why I always urge and constantly stress that we've got to think outside the box. The staff that work at headquarters and the staff that work in the field, because we've always got to change. Not just change to change, but change to strengthen our union, to provide stronger services to our members, to engage them, to educate them, to mobilize them across the country. I mean, if we don't do that, and this is something that we preach every single day, if we don't do that, then we're going to have a problem with all of the attacks that we're confronted with every single day.
Michael?
When did you start to see the rise of organizations like ALEC and the sort of coordinated efforts, specifically within like cities and municipalities, in terms of like the pushing back and the corporatist agenda in your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly we're doing that. I mean, we're working in coalition with a number of other progressive partners, and we're identifying the people that are trying to take our rights away from us, that are behind attacks on collective bargaining, that are behind attacks on right-to-work legislation, the attack on prevailing wages, the attack on voting rights. All of these people are the same people. They really are. They're the same people. And they come from this right-wing ideology that says that they need to have more wealth and more power at the expense of the 99% who are trying to play by the rules every single day. And one of the things that I think that we've got to do better, and we moved away from it, is to develop much stronger coalitions and work more closely with our allies and with our partners across the country, because all of us are under attack. And we may have differences of opinions on certain things, but overall, they believe in the same kinds of issues that we believe in. Mm-hmm. And the only way that we can fight back, because we don't have the density within the labor movement that we've had before. I mean, at one time we were 35, 36, 38% organized. Now the private sector is at about 6.5%. The public sector is at 35%, but we lost members for the first time in 2012, since the records have been kept. So they're coming after us now. So I think it's incumbent upon us to go back to basics and work not only as far as rebuilding our unions, but developing stronger relationships within the labor movement and outside the labor movement, and attacking those folks like ALEC and other organizations who clearly just want to take us out of the ballgame. They don't want to hurt us. They want to take us out of the ballgame completely. We've been pretty successful. As a matter of fact, I'm doing an interview tomorrow on with The Nation regarding ALEC and how we've been able to fight back and kind of stop them dead in their tracks in certain states and have people actually pull out of ALEC because we've developed some street heat, and folks have looked at it and said, "Oh, we don't want to take this on," so they've kind of backed away from ALEC. But we've got to do a lot more of that, whether it's ALEC, whether it's other organizations that are trying to really harm working families, harm the middle class, take away unions and the ability for unions to represent folks. And we have partners in this. We've just got to reach out to our partners, and we've got to develop not transactional relationships, but transformational relationships that are long-lasting. But there comes a responsibility with that. And that responsibility is that we can't always reach out and call out for help, and these folks come to us. We've got to help them when they have a crisis. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a two-way street. And sometimes we've kind of walked away from that, and people don't like that. They don't appreciate it. So we've got to develop some longer-term relationships and identify who the enemy really is. And ALEC is a number one enemy.
One more on this topic, and then we'll go to New York. Go ahead, Michael.
Sticking with the theme of adapting to the times and the challenges that we face now, as of course you know, the AFL has recently unveiled their vision of the changes that they think that the movement needs to make in order to do that, and how we interact with workers, and changes in how we interact with workers. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts you could share with us.
Well, what do you think they're trying to do? Let me ask you the question. I mean, what have you been reading about?
Well,
What have you been hearing?
what I've been hearing is that they want to move to a model that's more open as far as dealing with workers, maybe outside the collective bargaining relationship, and more in a representational relationship where any worker who wants to be involved can be involved, whether or not they're represented under a collective bargaining agreement or a bargaining unit or not. And how that would work, I don't know yet, and I'm sure there'll be more details to come out. But I was wondering what your
Well, most of you probably know that I serve on the convention committee of this dealing with this issue, dealing with thinking outside the box as far as organizing, developing stronger relationships with folks, and then strengthening our political operation across the country. You have a variety of opinions on this issue. I think everyone within the AFL-CIO understands that we've got to develop partnership arrangements, partnership relationships with groups outside of the Federation, outside of the AFL-CIO. And we've got to think of ways in which we can work much more closely together with them. Some people within the AFL-CIO believe that the way you do that is to make them a formal part of the AFL-CIO, in a non-collective bargaining relationship, okay, where these organizations don't have a collective bargaining relationship with an employer. Some would like to see them become a part in some kind of way that means resources going into the AFL-CIO, having them become a part of the AFL-CIO. I think that's far-fetched, to be quite honest with you. I believe in developing partnerships, but there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago which talked about the NAACP and the Sierra Club and La Raza being under the umbrella of the AFL-CIO. Well, let me tell you something. I talk to Ben Jealous pretty frequently, okay? He's the head of the NAACP. He believes in partnerships, but there's absolutely no way that he's going to move under the umbrella of the AFL-CIO, and the same with the Sierra Club, and the same with La Raza. I mean, they have their own foundations that they have built, but they also want to work very, very closely with us. So, I mean, for those who think that we can somehow magically cajole them, not cajole them, that's not the right word, but maybe it is, to coax them into becoming a part of the AFL-CIO and pay some form of dues or something. I don't think that's what they're looking for. And I think that frightens a lot of people within the AFL-CIO, to be quite honest with you, because you have those, especially within the building trades, who believe that labor unions are a part of the Federation. That's how it should be. It should only be unions as far, being a part of the Federation, and we can have all of these other kinds of relationships, but the Federation is a Federation. I think there's an in-between ground. I mean, and we're testing it with a couple of organizations now, with Working America, for example. Working America is directly affiliated with the AFL-CIO. It's a local union. It's organized, I guess, about 3 million people across the country. We think we can do more with Working America, and even have some kind of financial relationship with the members as far as asking them to pay a little bit, not as much per cap as national unions would pay, but have them connected some kind of way with the AFL-CIO, and we're going to be exploring that, I believe, and looking at different models across the country. We're working with a number of worker centers across the country, and right now we have the ability, if there's a worker center that doesn't have a collective bargaining relationship with the employer, but is representing workers, if they want to become a part of the AFL-CIO, then there's a process by which they apply, and then there's a vote taken by the Executive Council, and they can either be in and become a part. We've done that with the Taxi Cab Alliance in New York and a number of other worker centers across the country. But then there too, I think we have to be careful, because you have so many worker centers popping up in areas that we're actively organizing, okay? And I remember telling Rich a couple of weeks ago that I don't want to have to be competing with the AFL-CIO, and we are the biggest union in the AFL-CIO. I don't want to have to compete with the AFL-CIO for members. So if, in fact, you're talking to a worker center that may, say, for example, represents domestic workers, I mean, we're actively organizing domestic workers. Then their relationships and their communication should come through us. And we should be the ones talking. And they should not have the ability to directly affiliate with the AFL-CIO, because if that's the case, then that can really harm our organizing capacity within that industry. You've got some folks putting things on the table, and we're trying to think about it, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Where it's going to end up, I think that it'll be a strong partnership for them. We still have some meetings that will occur before the AFL-CIO convention, which is in Los Angeles in September. But as far as thinking more globally, as far as having these organizations just magically want to come under the umbrella of the AFL-CIO, for the most part, I don't think you're going to have a lot of organizations that want to do that, but they want to partner. They want to partner with us, and they want to develop ways in which they can partner with us on certain issues across the country.
Well, let's turn to New York City,
The Big Apple.
the Big Apple and the District Council 37 that you spent some interesting years with. Why don't you tell us, why don't we start with what it was like, what you discovered when you got there?
A big mess.
Details would be helpful here. Give us a little sense of what kind of a mess it was.
Well, I guess this would have been 1996, 1997. I was an assistant to Jerry, and we started hearing things out of New York that wasn't making us feel too good, as far as some things that were going on in 37. So we kind of kept our ears to the ground just to listen to what was going on, see what was happening. And the problems were very real in New York City. You had 56 local unions that comprised District Council 37. You had a number of very powerful local presidents who had been local presidents for a long time. Charlie Hughes was the president of Local 372, which represented the Board of Education employees in New York City, mostly part-time workers. They had some of the highest dues, I would not only say in New York City, but across the country. But he delivered. Charlie was able to deliver for his members. But sometimes, and I've seen this happen not only in New York City, but across the country, when you're successful in delivering for your members, then if you aren't careful, you'll let it get to your head. And you lose perspective of who you are and what the union is about. And the union becomes you. The institution becomes you. And as long as you're delivering for your members and they're treating you like a king and you're on a pedestal, then I've seen it happen where folks will take advantage of that situation. That's exactly what happened in Local 372. And that was the beginning of us coming into District Council 37 in New York City. Charlie Hughes was a very popular guy, not only within AFSCME in New York City, but in the political world of New York City. Very powerful with the politicians. He ran almost separately and apart from District Council 37. That's how strong he was. But he ended up stealing millions and millions of dollars from that local union and doing things that a local leader should never do. We started finding out about it. The district council started finding out about some things and called Jerry and me. And nobody thought that we would take on this problem. I think most folks thought that we would just put blinders on and say this is too big to deal with, and we don't want to screw around with 37. It's our second largest affiliate, second to CSEA, representing 125,000 members. But we both realized that this was something that was so serious that we had to tackle it. So we met with the District Council 37 leadership, and then we decided, with their support, that we were going to put Local 372 under administratorship for the first time. Now, Charlie was a friend of the national unions. We would call him and he would do anything that we asked him to do. And that made it much more difficult because we considered him a friend. But he was also abusing the trust and abusing the faith and abusing the dues dollars of those members. So we ended up putting it under administratorship, but we also knew that it was only the tip of the iceberg. Because we started finding out about other local unions where they were doing similar things, maybe not to that level, but where the dues dollars were being misspent, misappropriated. And then I guess the kicker was that we had a ratification vote around the contract. And it was a tough vote. It was a tough contract. Stanley Hill was the executive director, and for the first time, I think, in 37's history, they came back with a recommendation that the contract be ratified with 2 goose eggs, 2-year contract. No wage increases, everything else is status quo. Charlie was not supporting it. A guy named Jim Butler, who was a local president of 420, which was another large local, was not supporting it. 1549 Al Diop was supporting it, but he really wasn't that vocal about it. The leadership of 37, meaning the officers of 37, decided that they needed to get this contract through. And instead of listening to the will of the members, because it would have gone down, then they developed a plan and they developed a scheme to stuff the ballot boxes, to the point where the contract was passed, but they left a trail behind them as far as the bad things that they did in getting this contract ratified. A number of people went to the press. A number of people went to the district attorney's office, and it just blew up right in our face. Now, this was when we had 372 under administratorship. So because it was blowing up and because it was becoming so public, Jerry and I went up, and I remember Jerry and I talking on the train going up, and he said, "Lee, we don't have any other choice but to put it under. There's too many things going on here." And I said, "Yeah, I think you're right." And he said, "And quite honestly, the only person I think that could do it is you, based upon the relationships." And I did have a lot of relationships in New York, and I mean the experiences I shared with you, with what I was doing across the country in Detroit and Philadelphia and a lot of the urban areas across the country. And I remember him telling me, he said, "We're going to get in here, and you'll have all of the help and support of the National Union. Anything you need to clean this up, but it's a mess." And he said, "You'll be in there 6 months." Then he said, "You'll be home after 6 months."
The old 6-month one.
3.5 years later,
How many years?
3.5. We took it, we placed it under administratorship. Our members were so angry, and they should have been. I mean, because this was like in the Times and in the New York Post and the Daily News and the Chief, every single day. I mean, the union was just getting battered for the bad things that a number of the local presidents did. We started finding out about kickbacks. There was a restaurant across the street from DC 37 called Gee Whiz. And they would order food, and Gee Whiz would charge them double, and then the local presidents would pocket the additional funds that were being charged. It was a tradition in New York to give out turkeys on Thanksgiving and during Christmas. Give them out to the members. Well, that was a scheme too, because the turkeys were inflated, the price of the turkeys were inflated, and the local presidents would put the money in their pockets. So you had this going on, you had just out and outright thievery from the local treasuries, and then you had the stuffing of the ballot boxes. So you can imagine our people were pissed off, and they weren't pissed off at Giuliani. He happened to be the mayor then, real bad guy. They were pissed off at the union. They were pissed off at 37. But I will say this, I mean, for those 3.5 years, and one thing that I learned about our members, they are very resilient and they are very forgiving. Because I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have stormed 37 and tried to lock all of us up with all the bad things that were going on there. But they were angry, And they were mad, but they were also pleading, saying, you're our union. We pay dues to this union. And you're there to fight for us. And we want to fight with you. But you've got to show us that you aren't going to rip us off, but you're willing to fight. And if you're willing to fight, we're going to forgive you. We're going to forgive you, and we'll walk side by side with you. And that's essentially what we had to do when we went in. 22 people ended up going to jail. Most of them the local president, some the vendors who were participating in these schemes. I had to work regularly with the district attorney's office. His name was Robert Morgenthau. He was older than dirt when I was up there. I mean, this guy was old. But he also had a reputation. You would never, ever cross him or his office. I remember having a meeting with him, and we did. We used all the resources of the National Union. Jean Nolan was the public affairs director then. She came up with me. Charlie Jagonis got an apartment, because I had to get an apartment up there. I mean, this was not like back and forth stuff. I was living up there. We tried to make it home on the weekends. Larry Weinberg was a co-general counsel. He was up there with me all the time. We had people coming in from D.C. and out all the time because I needed help. I needed some support. I remember talking to Jerry one time saying, this is really just overwhelming. And, I mean, here are all the things that I'm trying to deal with. And what would your recommendations and suggestions be? And he said, I don't have any, Lee. I don't have any. Because I've never had to deal with the situation that you're in right now, nor do I ever want to. And he said, but I believe in you and I believe in your gut. And I believe in common sense and you applying common sense to this problem. And he said, so I can't give you an answer to your questions, but I believe that you're going to make it right. And I mean, that was the confidence that he showed to me. But let me tell you something. There were some times when I would go to bed at night and didn't want to wake up in the morning. I mean, it was that bad. I'll tell you about one meeting with Morgenthau. We had committed, when we placed 37 under administratorship, and Jerry was with me, we had committed two things. One, we were going to hire an outside forensic audit firm to not only audit 37, but audit all of the 56 local unions. That was a commitment that we made to our members and to the leadership of 37. The second thing was that we were going to hire a, for the lack of a better word, a detective agency to take a look at what happened with the vote rigging. And this organization was called Kroll and Associates. As a matter of fact, most of them came from the CIA and the FBI, or the DA's office from New York. So we hired both of those organizations, institutions, to help us try to figure out a way out of this big mess that we were in. And I remember getting a call from Morgenthau one day, and he said that I needed to come over and meet with him right away. That it was very serious, and that I needed to bring my attorneys with me. I thought, oh, okay, well, now what's getting ready to happen here?
You're gonna walk out like
So I remember going to Larry, saying we got to go over to see Morgenthau. We had a couple of attorneys that were on the 37 payroll, and I told them to come along. And I also told Kroll and Associates, because they had a number of people that worked for Morgenthau that had left to make some money with Kroll. I said, I want you guys to be there too, because you're recognizable faces. Now, I've been dealing with him for quite a while, Morgenthau. And I remember going in and sitting down, and he didn't come to the meeting at first. He sent his deputy. His deputy's name was Castleman. As a matter of fact, he would do bit parts on Law and Order, New York Law and Order.
No kidding.
But that was his deputy, and he was in charge of all of the bad stuff that was going on with 37. And I remember we were sitting there, and he had his team of people, and he came in, and he said, we've got a very, very serious discussion we want to hold with you. We are asking you to stop all of the investigations that you're undertaking with Kroll and with the accounting firm, because it's getting in our way. And we're getting ready to uncover a lot of bad stuff. And you guys are getting in our way, and we would ask you to stand down and not do it. And I said, well, we can talk about how we're getting in your way, and we can talk about how we can work more closely together. But I said, I'm not going to tell them to stand down because the president of the union was here and gave a commitment to our members and to our leadership that we were going to do this. And it was our responsibility. We were going to pay for it, and we were going to do it. And I'm not going to call off these investigators in any way. Now, if we can work with you, that's fine. If we can figure out ways in which we can move out of your way but still conduct the business that we must do, then let's talk about that. And I remember Councilman looked at me and he said, you don't understand. You don't understand. He said, you're going to stand down. He said, now I was asking you nice, but you're going to stand down. And you're going to tell your people to get out of our way. And he said, now let me tell you something. You're new to this city. I don't think you know New York City that well. I said, I know enough about it. And he said, well, I don't think you know it. He said, and you don't know my business. And you don't know what we have to do in order to get this under control. So we are not asking you, we are telling you to stand down and stop your investigations. So I looked at him and I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, you don't know me, and I don't come from New York City, but I'm here and I was sent to do something. And I'm representing the president of the National Union who gave a commitment to our members and our activists and leaders in 37. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, do I know your business? No, I don't. But you don't know mine, and you don't threaten me in any way. We're going to continue. If you don't want to work this out, we're going to continue to do what we do. And he said, you really don't mean that. I said, yeah, I mean it. I mean it. So he said, I'm going to give you some time because you really don't know what you're saying. I'm going to give you some time to think about this. And he pulled his team out and he walked away. We were sitting in the room with my attorneys and with Kroll, and you could not hear a pin drop. Couldn't hear a pin drop. Then all of a sudden, one of the Kroll guys got up. He used to work with Morgenthau. And he said, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. He said, I don't believe anybody's talked to Castleman that way. And you know he's going to go back and report it to Morgenthau. And he said, and I don't know what they're going to come back with, Lee. He said, but I have never seen anybody stand up to the DA the way that you did. And by this time, I mean, sweat was pouring down my face. And I said, I don't know what these are supposed to be the good guys, right? So they gave us about 15 minutes. Castleman came back in, but he came back in with Morgenthau. And Morgenthau sat down and he started talking. And I said, wait, hold it. I said, we've got to clear the air here. I said, we are working with you. We have been working with you every day that I have set foot in this dump. I said, I'm a miserable person right now, so you can't make my life more miserable than what it is right now. Go ahead and give it a shot. Give it a shot, man. I said, but I'm going to do what was committed by the National Union president. Regardless of how you threaten me or what you say, I want to do that. Now, if there's a way we can work this between both organizations, then we'll do that. But don't threaten me again, and don't ever have him threaten me again. I figured, hey, I might as well give it a shot. I didn't know what was going to happen. So Morgenthau said, everybody leave the room except Lee and me. So everybody got up, including our folks, and they were like walking. I said, goodbye. So he said, okay. He said, we started this off wrong. And he went through it and he walked through it and he said, you guys really are getting in our way of certain things. I said, look, I told you that we could, work this out. But you can't have your people threaten me in the way that they did. I'm trying to do the right thing. And I would expect that you're going to help me do the right thing. And we were able to work out a relationship based upon that meeting. And we didn't back down. We didn't back off. We did make some adjustments so they could do some things that they needed to do. And I remember the Kroll folks and Larry Weinberg and our attorneys were all standing around the elevator. And I guess I must have talked to Morgenthau for maybe 45 minutes, an hour by ourselves. And they were all standing around the elevator, and they, with a look of shock on their face based upon what I had done. And I walked out, and I was ready to fall out. It was like I had been in a war with these guys. And they wanted to talk, and I said, don't say anything until we're out of the building. So we're on the elevator, we go down, and you couldn't hear a pin drop on that elevator. We walk out the building, and they just said, holy shit, what did Morgenthau tell you? And I said, we got a deal, we got a plan. They said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, we're serious. And I said, you can't let people push you around that way. But it was some bad stuff. It was some bad stuff. I could tell you some stories about the family being involved. You hear about some of these things sometimes. Well, it was a reality in 37 with some of the locals, where the mob had infiltrated some of the locals, and we had to figure out ways to move them out without endangering us. But let me tell you something. And it was for 3.5 years. We fought back. One of the first things that I did, and still having to clean up that stuff, we had to have an enemy. And I didn't want the enemy to be the union. And the enemy was the union when I first came in. Make no mistake about it. So I remember having a meeting with Giuliani, and I was sitting down talking to him, and I said, guess what, Mr. Mayor? You're going to be the enemy. People don't like you anyway, so this is real easy for us, okay? People don't like you anyway. And he looked at me and he said, I understand. He said, Lee, just as long as we can continue to talk. And I said, no, we'll be able to continue to talk, and you can call me and I can call you, but some of the things that you're proposing, our people are pissed off about it, and you're going to be the lightning rod, man. I'm going to make you the lightning rod. I'm going to get them off of my back, and we will be on your back. And we had a little mole in the city hall who was in the meeting when I had it with Giuliani, and he called us later, because I had kept some of the DC 37 staff in place who have been around for a long time. And he called the 37 staff, and he said, well, your guy met with Giuliani and us today. And my staffer said, yeah, I know. And he said, well, this is what Giuliani said. We ain't dealing with Stan Hill anymore. And that was exactly right. They were not dealing with Stan Hill. They were dealing with a new guy that was going to do anything that he could possibly do to mobilize and energize our members once again so they could feel proud of their union. And that's what we were able to do. We had big rallies. People came. We had negotiations in New York City with Giuliani. We got one of the best contracts we've ever gotten from a mayor in that city, whether Republican or Democrat, because we had the members that were solidified behind us, and we were able to push and push hard, and we were able to rebuild that union. But it took 3.5 years of hell to do that.
Questions for Lee? And you could open it up too. New York City questions.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
What did you do with most of the staff at 37 when you got there? Was there a big turnover? Did you get rid of a bunch of people, or you mentioned you kept some top folks?
There wasn't a big turnover of staff because, for the most part, the staff was trying to do the right thing. There was a big turnover with the local presidents because we ended up having to put a number of the locals under administratorship. Not only 372, but 1549, which was the largest, I guess second largest at that time, behind 372. We put that under administratorship. A number of the mid-sized locals. So we had to blow out a lot of the elected leaders. We kept the DC 37 executive board in place because I thought that it would be, people think that when you're the administrator, you have complete reign. Well, you do, constitutionally you do, but that's not reality. You've got to work with these folks, and they've got to start trusting your judgment and trusting you. And the way that you do that is to bring the ones that were trying to play by the rules, that were trying to do the right thing, you bring them in, and you really treat them as a part of the team. So I made the decision that I was not going to blow out the board. Okay. Now, I did make the decision that they could vote on something, but if I disagreed with it, and I felt very strongly about it, then that vote was not binding. Okay. But I kept the board in place for those who didn't go to jail. They were still, they were there. We had monthly meetings. We had, in DC 37, you have monthly meetings with executive board, and you have monthly meetings with the delegates, and the delegates are representatives from each of the 56 local unions who were elected. We kept those meetings going. We were transparent. We talked about everything and anything that was happening. We didn't try to hide anything about what was happening, and people really gained our trust. Because they knew me, but they didn't know how I was going to react to the situation, nor did I know how they were going to react to theirs. But I did know this, that I couldn't do it alone. We had some great staff there, 37 staff. I mean, we had great national union staff that came in that helped us. But we had some great staff there from 37 who really cared about the union, who were embarrassed about what went on, who were ashamed, and they wanted to be a part of rebuilding it. And that's exactly what we went about doing. We went about rebuilding it, and I couldn't have done it. I really couldn't have done it without the staff. I mean, who knew the city, who knew the players, who knew the actors, who knew the politicians much more than I did. I couldn't have done it without their support and without their help.
Did you see that having a ripple effect going forward, that either other houses cleaning up, either within our union or other unions, that it kind of set a tone saying, look, if this is existing, we're going to go in and root it out? You said, we made a conscious decision not to look the other way. Did you see it kind of helping union as a whole moving forward?
Well, I think it sent a message. I mean, it sent a very, very strong message to anybody that was thinking about or doing some bad things across the country within our union, that if we were willing to take on DC 37, which essentially for the most part was our flagship council, very, very complicated council with a lot of egos and a lot of very powerful leaders. If we were willing, if the National Union was willing to take them on, if they did something bad, then I think it sent a strong message to the people across the country that if we took 37 on, we damn sure will take you on. And as a matter of fact, we made some constitutional changes based upon what was going on at 37, where we have a program now where we audit our councils and affiliates of 2,000 more people every single year. Sometimes we're unable to do that every year, but it's a requirement, and if we can't do it within that year, we're going to do it very, very closely afterwards, just so we can look at the record, so we can analyze what's going on and stop something before it starts. We didn't have that requirement before. We came up with a zero tolerance policy, and Jerry and I talked about that all the time. We had zero tolerance for anybody that was doing wrong. That included folks that didn't support the House, but it also included people that supported the House. And people saw that, because when we took Charlie Hughes on, and folks never thought that we would because he was so close to us, when we took Al Diop on, he was the president of Local 1549, very close to us, served on the International Executive Board. We took him on. He ended up going to jail. It sent a very, very strong message across the country. Yeah.
What kind of tone did you see with the membership-wise, whether it be that it affected our bargaining abilities or our organizing abilities as a fallout from the DC 37 issues?
Across the country?
Across the country. Because obviously it had a big effect in New York, but...
Well, people know about it. I mean,
Yeah, 'cause it was
New York
everywhere.
City, whatever happens in New York City, people find out about it, right? I mean, you can't hide it. And the papers were reporting on this every day. I mean, literally every single day, there was something in the papers about what was going on at 37. Our leaders were reading about it. Our members were reading about it.
Right.
In organizing campaigns, the boss threw it in our face, saying, "You really want to belong to a union? Look what they're doing up in New York City." And we had to fight that. We had to have our PR department, we called it public relations then, public affairs, not communications. But we had to have them ready to respond to those kinds of issues, so it would support our organizers who were going into the field and trying to organize new groups of workers across the country. But it hurt. It hurt us. I mean, and it hurt our reputation, because I think that for the most part, people believe that we didn't have the kinds of issues and problems that other unions, especially in the private sector, had, like the Teamsters, for example, or the laborers, or even SEIU. That we were exempt from that in some kind of way. And that was an unrealistic way to think, because, I mean, we're made up of people. You have good people and you have bad people. And if people can figure out a way to do some things that may not be the correct thing to do, some people will figure that way. You've just got to make it harder, where folks, you make it more difficult for them to figure it out. And then you also got to stress that if, in fact, you do something that's wrong, then you're going to be punished. You're going to be punished in one way or the other. But it hurt. It hurt our organizing campaigns. We had to play the defensive, be on the defensive. It even hurt us, I think, in negotiations, because it was a way to tear the union down and to discredit us and to weaken us. But we were able to get over it. I mean, and we got over it in New York. I mean, as I said, we had in fact, Paul was there. I was intent upon having a huge rally in New York City for the contract fight. And that was another way to get the heat off of 37. And I worked with Randy Weingarten, who was then the president of UFT. She's now the president of AFT, good friend. We established and developed our relationship in New York City. I had known her before, but we worked very, very closely together in New York. A guy named Dennis Rivera was the president of 1199 SEIU, and the three of us started meeting very regularly. Something similar, to be quite honest with you, with what I'm doing now in Washington, with meeting regularly and developing and coordinating strategies with AFT, NEA, SEIU, and AFSCME. I did the same thing. I used the same model that I used in New York, where the three of us got together, AFT, UFT, DC 37, and 1199, and we would meet regularly, and we would meet publicly. And we would even tell reporters, we're going to be here meeting. And the reporters would come, and they'd want to interview us. We wanted people to see that we were planning something, that we were strategizing about something, that we were meeting together for the first time in many, many years. Because many times those three unions would be fighting one another. And we came up with this idea about having a big rally to oppose the Giuliani administration and what he was proposing to do, or what he had enacted that impacted not only on public service workers in the city, but working families, because 1199 had a very small public sector membership. They represented the private hospitals in New York. But Dennis, to his credit, understood that there needed to be a linkage of the fight and the attacks on working families in the city. I remember calling here and telling Jerry, we're going to have this big rally. And he said, are you nuts? What? Don't you have enough on your plate? And I said, we've got to do it, man. We've got to show force here. We've got to show that we've got our members in the communities behind us. And it took a lot of planning. And when was that? Was that in 99? I guess it was, or 2000. 99, I think. And Paul came up. We had a number of National Union staff that came up. And we formed at 37, or the 37 members, but then a lot of them met where the rally was, which was right in front of City Hall, which was right down the street. So we marched to City Hall. Randy brought her people across the Brooklyn Bridge, thousands of teachers. Dennis brought his folks from Midtown, and we all converged. And the other unions supported us too, because we worked with the Central Labor Council. And that was one of the largest rallies that the city had seen. And we converged on City Hall and really made a statement. And that was the beginning, and that was the start of our members saying, we're in the fight again. And you know what? I'm convinced of this. Our members want to see us fight because they're fighters. They want to fight. They want to fight for the right reasons. And if we're fighting for the right reasons, then they understand this, that we aren't going to win all of them, and we're going to lose some. But it's better to be engaged in the fight, engaged in the battle, and engage our members in that fight rather than stepping on the sidelines. And that's exactly what we did in New York.
Is there any specific changes that you can think of that may have been done as far as our strategies in that because of?
I'm sorry, what?
Are there any changes that you can think of as far as strategies go that were a fallout directly because of 37?
Strategies that pertain to what's happening now, or what?
Yeah, or that have grown from that to up until now.
Well, I think that I use some of the things that I learned that I was involved with in 37, and I'm applying them to DC and to what I'm attempting to do as the National Union President of AFSCME. Whether it's working more closely with our labor partners and trying to push our differences aside, working more closely with our community allies and community partners and the churches. We really did that in New York City. I remember going to churches and speaking on a lot of Sundays. Just where we had relationships, where I knew our members attended those churches. I wanted them to see that we were visible and that we were trying to develop stronger and longer lasting relationships with organizations that they had relationships with. So we're trying to do that now on the national level. I mean, dealing with politics in New York City and New York State. We were dealing with a Republican mayor then. We were dealing with a Republican governor, Pataki. We were dealing with a Republican Senate and a Democratic Assembly. And I learned that we had to have relationships with all of them. Now, this was a little bit different back then because we were dealing with some Republicans who were very moderate, who believed in unions, who would work with unions. A guy named Joe Bruno was the head of the New York State Senate. I tell you, I could get more business done with him sometimes than I could with Shirley Silver, who was the leader of the Assembly, Speaker of the Assembly, who was a Democrat. But I guess I would never, even though I would never want to do this again. I would never want to have another New York. And I would never want to be asked to go in there again, and I won't be asked because I would have to be asking me to do it, and I wouldn't do that. But I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. I mean, because it provided me an experience that I didn't have working at headquarters. I always thought in my mind that I really wasn't a headquarters person because I was in the field so much. I mean, Steve was in the field with me. And then I was exposed to so many different kinds of things, whether it was research, collective bargaining, organizing, political action. So I always thought that I had a broader vision than just working here at headquarters, and that was a good thing. And I thought that was very important. But I got to tell you that I could not trade the experience that I had with 37, and I don't know that it could ever be replicated in my lifetime. And it just added to me being who I am today. I think that you could probably count on one hand the folks within the union now, staff, local leaders who have been involved in a situation such as that, and they would have had to come from 37, okay, and they would have had to live it because it was such a, I mean, it was it was a tough time and it was a telling time, but it gave me the background and the experience and the wisdom and the strength and the confidence. When I got out of there, I know that I did the right thing. And I know that I was a part of rebuilding. I was a part of rebuilding that union in 37. And with that kind of challenge that we were able to confront, and we were successful in confronting it, I'm not afraid of any challenge that confronts us as a national union or our affiliates across the country.
I'll give you another one along the lines of the question you asked. I think that if you go back to that rally, which may have been in 2000, may have been in 99, but it's before September 11, 2001,
Oh, right, yeah.
that you'll see on the T-shirts or the signs, the slogan, "Everyday Heroes, Heroes Every Day."
Everyday heroes.
And so that, which I don't think you'll find before you got there. That was
That was our idea.
and we now have 12 or 13 years of the union lifting up this concept of what our members do, and the everyday heroism of it, and of course, September 11th really made that a much more prominent feature. But and you might think that that's when we came up with this whole meme. Is that what you guys call it in the communications department? I got a good word there. But this whole whatever it is. But it actually goes back earlier to this struggle to create a different definition, self-definition for the members of DC 37 so that they could turn the page on the crap that they were coming
we
out
wanted
of.
our members to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
And they weren't feeling good about themselves, and we wanted to do it in a variety of ways. And we did the Everyday Heroes campaign prior to 9/11, where we had it on billboards, we had it on the subways. We rented subway. The good thing about New York, when you rent space on the subways, and it's supposed to come down, those bulletin boards, they don't come down. They stay forever. They stay forever. I think there might be still some up there. But we had an Everyday Heroes campaign. And you got a couple of people that are working in this building who I hired in 37 and ultimately brought back here to the National Union. Chris Pellicano was my communications director in 37. I hired him to be the communications director. He was working in a place called Phoenix House, which was a drug rehabilitation place in New York City. And I hired him to help me, and he was a communications director there. Steve Gretzik, who's the IS director here. I hired him to be the IS director in 37, because 37 was a big operation.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, bigger than the National Union. We had 800 people working in that building. Okay, because not only did you have servicing happening in that building, but you had our health and safety, health and security work was being done, where people, checks were being processed, bills were being processed, all of those kinds of things, because we run our own health and security plan. So it was a big deal. It was a big, big operation. But we were able to hire some talent. We were able to bring in folks who remembered the good things about 37 and wanted to be a part of the renewal, and they saw that it was being renewed, and they wanted to be a part of that. So I was able to bring some folks when I came back. I brought Gretzik back, I guess, about a year after I came back, but it was always in the plans that he would be coming back. And then Chris really didn't want to leave New York, so it had to take him a little bit longer, but based upon the direction that he saw the National Union moving and what I wanted to do, and what my goals were when I was a staff person and before I ran for office at the National Union, I talked about plans with him, and he wanted to be a part of that, just like he wanted to be a part of the experience of DC 37. Paul did mention 9/11, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that just briefly. For those of you who haven't been in New York, how many of you know where 37 is? Where District Council 37 is? For those of you who don't, 37 was 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center, okay, on the West Highway. My apartment was right across the street from the World Trade Center. I would walk over the catwalk from west, cross west, and go right into the World Trade Center, and then walk a block and a half away to our building. And on 9/11, it was actually primary day in New York, and we had gotten up early, and we were visiting the different sites where we had people working. It was a mayor's race and city council races. And we had a number of retirees who were meeting in 37 that morning. A guy named Dennis Sullivan, close friend, who really, salt of the earth. He was a research and negotiations director, understood the city. I really relied upon him. He was in the building, and he was doing some things with the retirees. He was supposed to be going over to the World Trade Center that morning for a meeting, but he got detained because he wanted to do some stuff with the retirees. I remember that we were in Brooklyn. I had gone over to the building to pick up some stuff from the office, and then I had a driver there. You need a driver in New York. I had a driver there, and he took me over to Brooklyn, and we had visited one of the polling sites, and I remember getting a call from the building. And the call was that something's happening at the World Trade Center. They didn't know what was happening, but something happened. And the first rumor, if you guys remember this, was that a helicopter had flown into the building. And our folks were, if you recall, I don't know how many years before, but there was a terrorist attack in the parking lot of the World Trade Center. So when you hear that, then you kind of get a little anxious. And so I said, okay, well, whoever was riding that helicopter and flying that helicopter didn't know what the hell they were doing. You didn't think about it being a terrorist attack right away. But then I remember getting another call, and they said, well, it wasn't a helicopter, it was a small plane. And so I asked the driver to pull off on the side of the road, and you could actually see the first tower burning, okay? Then the news report started coming out that it was actually a large plane. They hadn't identified that it was a plane from, I think the first plane that hit was a plane from Boston. We pulled off the side of the road. We were right across the river, looking right at the World Trade Center, and I saw the second plane come in. And you see it coming in, and it was coming in very slow, and you knew that it was a terrorist attack. It was just the way that the plane was coming in. And it hit the second building. And a whole bunch of folks had pulled off on the side of the road. I mean, and it was just, you were just like frozen in time. And I remember telling my driver, I said, okay, we're going back to the building. And we're going to go back to the building. We got people there. And I called the building and I said, get everybody out. We had a loudspeaker system. Get everybody out. This is a terrorist attack. And they had obviously heard it already. They heard the two planes hit, and that's when all hell broke loose. Then the first tower crumbled. And that's when really all hell broke loose. And I kept on telling my driver, get me back to the building because we got people there. And he kept on saying, sir, we won't be able to get back there. We'll never be able to get back there. And I said, you find a way to cross that damn bridge. We're going back to the building. But by this time, all the cops were out. They were blocking the bridges and everything. They knew that it was a terrorist attack. They didn't know what else was going to hit. Obviously, we weren't able to get back to the building. I ended up maybe at midnight that night after riding around the city and making sure that the retirees were out and talking to folks. The cell phones weren't operating. I had family here in D.C. I heard that the plane had hit the Pentagon, so I was concerned about that. They were concerned about me. We couldn't communicate. Finally, I was able to get in contact with Pam, and she's having a heart attack. We were having an organizing conference in Los Angeles, and a lot of our leaders were out there. Jerry was trying to call to see what was going on in New York. Nobody had heard from me. They didn't know where I was. So I called Pam, and I said, call my family. I'm okay. Call Jerry. I'm okay, but we've got a big fucking mess on our hands. And I ended up checking into a hotel somewhere in Jersey. I don't even know where it was because you couldn't get any hotels in the New York area. And obviously, I couldn't get back to my apartment, which was right across the street. So we checked into the hotel, and I immediately told Elliot Side was with me. He was my deputy director, who's the council director of Minnesota Council 5. And, I mean, you're just exhausted. You're drained. And I remember telling him, I'm going home, man. I mean, this is hell, living in hell. I mean, first you're trying to clean up the union. We've got it on the right track. And then this shit, I said, I'm going home, and I want to be with my family. And he begged me. He said, Lee, you can't. He said, your family's okay. He said, but you've got a bigger family here, and you've got to stay. And I said, oh, shit. But I ended up staying. We ended up moving our operations all over the city. A lot of folks gave us access to their buildings, UFT, for one, because they were in Midtown. We had to rent space. We literally had to recreate everything that we were doing within the headquarters of 37 with those 800 people. We had to move around. We were all over the place in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in Queens. We were all over the place trying to recreate what we would do there. I ended up getting back into my apartment about a month and a half later because you couldn't go in there at all. Although I was at ground zero that Thursday. It happened on Tuesday. We got special passes, and we worked through the mayor's office. And we were able to get special passes, and we had drivers that would take us in. We had to wear the special suits with the special coverings on the clothes and everything. Every time you would leave, the car would have to be sprayed, to get whatever poison or whatever was floating around the air. We ended up letting the Homeland Security people use the first floor in the basement. Well, the basement was really messed up, but the first floor was messed up too, but we let them use that, and they were able to clean it out. The deal was if we would let them use it, then we would have access to our building. Okay, so we could get in there and start cleaning it out too. At first, they didn't want us to do that, and I said, "Well, I guess you got to find another space." And they said, "Oh man, we're dealing with a crisis here." I said, "I know, but I mean, we got to get in our building too." So they essentially let us get into the building while they were on our first floor. And I mean, and they ran those big ass telephone lines that were about this thick all over the place. I mean, it was something. But we weren't able to get back in our building for 4 months. When I went back to my apartment living room overlooked the Trade Center, and I remember going up the first time and looked out my living room window, and I remember calling where our maintenance guys were, and I said, "You guys come over here. I'll give you the special pass," because you even had to have a special pass to get to my apartment because it was right across the street. And I said, "I'm getting my clothes out of here. I can't stay here." And I had made some really good friends with the doormen who were members of 32BJ, SEIU. And they saw me go up, they greeted me, everybody hugged and everything, and then they saw me coming back down, and they said, "Lee, where are you going?" And they looked at me and they said, "You aren't staying here, are you? You're going to leave." And I said, "I'm not leaving the city, but I can't stay here." So we ended up breaking the lease, and I ended up moving over to Union Square. And we were all over the place for the next 4 months until we were able to move back into 37. But again, you saw that people just came together. I mean, under such severe circumstances, I mean, our folks were out there, they wanted to help. They were volunteering. We had our 911 folks on the phones. We had our EMTs that were at ground zero. The first person that died was a guy named Michael Judge, and he was a member of our union. He was a chaplain for the fire department. And he was talking to someone who was injured, and he had a heart attack. And he dropped dead right there, right at ground zero. So, I mean, our people sacrificed. I mean, but, you know, again, it's just a part of who you are. That's something that you'll never forget.
Let's see if anyone on the,
Any of you folks out there on the phone want to ask a question to Lee? Okay.
All participants are now in listen-only
So
mode.
we've got a little while to go. Let's segue to big cities. And before we stray into what we're dealing with today, because you had a number of occasions over in different decades of dealing with big cities whose conditions, taking Detroit just as an example, you could say the same thing about Philadelphia, have deteriorated in each of these decades in terms of their sustainability as employers, and several rounds of where this came out in the collective bargaining relationship with our councils, with our locals, some of which you were the guy on the scene. So, you know, today we have this awful situation in Philadelphia, no contract for 4 years, whatever it is. This bankruptcy in Detroit, and other comparable situations, maybe not as dramatic, but similarly stressful. And you know, our organization was built up with the members in these cities. New York, of course, is another one. So, you know, knowing what you know now, does this put the bargaining you did with Coleman Young or the bargaining you did with in Philadelphia with different mayors in a different light?
I don't know if it puts it in a different light. I mean, it annoys me when people want to blame public service workers and say that it's our fault that these cities are experiencing the crisis that they're in right now, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, our people get it; they understand it when the economy is suffering in a distressed area. Then they'll step up to the plate, and they'll take a hard swallow, and they'll sacrifice. And there are examples after examples of where our members have sacrificed in state and local governments where there's been fiscal distress. Yet if you listen to these pundits and if you listen to these reporters and the folks that like to blame unions and blame public services for everything, it's like we've just been at the trial and we're just taking and taking and taking and taking. And that's really the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, it really is the furthest thing from the truth. Now, I don't apologize for the fact that we are advocates, and we're advocates for working families, and we're advocates for public service workers, and we're advocates for our members, and they deserve to have a quality of living, a quality of life, a standard of living that can move them into the middle class. And I don't apologize for that at all, because I think that's what we do, and that's what we do best. But we also sacrifice when we have to sacrifice. And right now, whether it's Detroit or whether it's Philadelphia, where we've been without a contract for almost 5 years now, or in New York, where we've been without a contract for a couple of years, or other urban areas across the country where they're disrespecting the collective bargaining process, where they're trying to take the easy way out, where they're attacking our pensions, attacking our contracts, attacking our very right to exist and represent workers. Wisconsin, for example, what happened in state and local governments in that state, it angers me, and it's really pisses me off, because our people don't deserve that. And our folks play by the rules every single day, and they work hard every single day, and they are not ripping off the system, and they are not getting more than what they deserve. And for people to think that they should be the only folks that should sacrifice and use as the sacrificial lambs to deal with the problems that exist in the urban areas across the country, it's inexcusable, and I think that we've got to fight back. I mean, as far as Detroit is concerned, and I have made no bones about it, I have talked to the White House, and I'm going to continue to talk to them, because I think that they have no approach and they have no plan in dealing with the urban crisis that exists across this country. If they get away with doing what they're proposing to do in Detroit, Chapter 9 bankruptcy, then you better believe that other cities across the country experiencing the same kinds of fiscal difficulties are going to do the same thing, because they're going to take the easy way out, and they're going to attack workers and attack our pensions and attack our contracts and attack our benefits. That's what's going to happen. And I keep on telling the White House that they have a responsibility in this. They cannot run from this problem. And it annoys me when you've got the Secretary of the Treasurer, Jack Lew, get on TV saying that we aren't going to bail out Detroit. Well, I mean, don't even start off with the negative. I mean, what you should be talking about is, how can we help? I mean, what plans can we put together? What ideas can we come up with that will help not only Detroit, but our urban centers across this country? Right now, there is no urban agenda whatsoever. And that's where a lot of our members live. That's where essentially we were able to grow by the thousands in urban centers across the country. But that's where we organized. I mean, that's the history of our union. The first sanitation strike was in Philadelphia. And it was led by a guy named McEntee. Not the one that you know, but his father. Okay? I mean, we were able to grow in these urban areas. I mean, that's where our members live, and right now they are hurting. And for people to just point at them like they should take the total blame, it's just it's mind-boggling to me, and we just cannot be silent. And I am really furious right now, to tell you the truth, at the lack of leadership that's being shown by the current administration, because instead of running from the problem, they should be engaged in it. I mean, if you can run around and talk about rebuilding the middle class and give all this aid to foreign countries, and you can bail out Wall Street, and you can bail out the auto industry, which was the right thing to do. I'm not suggesting that you completely bail out Detroit, but you do have a responsibility in trying to figure out how we can fix this problem, and how we can fix this problem in other cities across the country. So we're going to continue to push that. And I pushed it at the AFL-CIO Executive Council a couple of weeks ago, where we passed a resolution. I've been talking to different senators and Congress people, and I'm going to continue to push that until somebody opens up their eyes to say, we've got to do something about this. So our people are not to blame. Our people aren't to blame. It's not their fault that Detroit is crumbling right. And make no mistake about it, Detroit is in shambles. I mean, we were there a couple of weeks ago for the Next Wave conference. I mean, if you go outside that downtown area, it looks like a third world country. There are specific problems that have to be addressed there. But you don't take the easy way out and just blame the public service worker and blame the unions who were trying to do the right thing. I mean, the manufacturing base crumbled in the 80s and 90s. That meant that the tax base crumbled, okay? That meant that there was not enough dollars to fund government jobs, public service jobs. I mean, it's a lot of things that occurred that we've got to figure out a way to fix, because Detroit is not the only city that's experiencing these kinds of difficulties. So, I mean, we're urging the administration to open up their eyes and help us in coming up with some solutions to this, and bringing some minds together that who can creatively think about how we deal with our urban centers across the country.
A city like Detroit has lost 2/3 of its population. You can be sure that the municipal government has lost more than 2/3 of its workforce. And the school board has lost more than 2/3 of its workforce. It's not like we're a larger piece of the thing than we were when it was prosperous. But none of the mayors that you bargained with realized that they had that there had not been a national urban policy for prosperous cities since the 60s, really. That or at least since the expiration of federal revenue sharing in the 70s. That there wasn't one during the Clinton administration, and there hasn't been one during the Obama administration. And I won't say anything about Bush and Reagan or the other Bush. So it's 30-plus years, and we even now have the situation where we can't even count on the current mayors to stand up for the cities. That they've been, instead of focusing on states and national governments, to recognize that people who live in these cities are citizens of the United States and citizens of Michigan and citizens of Pennsylvania. They've written them off, and now they turn on us. Because we're the other people that can be pointed at.
I think we might be winning somewhat the argument in Detroit about the attacks on pensions for the retirees, because you've had the New York Times come out with a number of articles saying that you should not attack the pensions of these folks that have, really given their life to serve the city. You've had the Detroit Free Press, who many times is not favorable to us, and they're coming out saying, "Wait a minute! I mean, this is going too far." So at least we're causing a discussion, I believe, and we're forcing people to think about it. And this in no way is aimed completely at the federal government, because it's not. They can't solve the problem by themselves. I mean, this is I think this is going to take a collective effort of folks, stakeholders, who can sit down and talk about what we must do with our urban centers, and that means that there's got to be a state responsibility as far as funding our urban centers. I mean, Michigan essentially has squeezed Detroit, where the state aid has been cut by, I think, more than 70% or something. I forget what the percentage is. Money that used to flow into Detroit that is no longer flowing into Detroit. And I think that you could probably look at any other major area that's experiencing the kinds of issues and problems, maybe not as severe as Detroit, but pretty close to it. And you'll see that there's been a lack of commitment and a lack of resources that are coming from the state governments as well. So I think it's just going to require some real strong thinking. I saw an article in the paper this past weekend talking about maybe the need for the Federal Reserve to be involved in these kinds of discussions. I just think we've got to remove all the roadblocks and sit down and talk about it and develop an urban strategy, because we cannot let our cities die. We just can't. I know a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservative Republicans would like to see our cities die because they know that they don't get votes out of those cities. But it's too important in the fabric of our lives every single day. My dad was a bus driver in the city of Cleveland. My mom was a community activist. We were able to move, and I think you would probably, if my dad was living today, he would say we really never were in the middle class, but we were able to do the kinds of things that we needed to do for our children, for my brother and me, sending us to school or whatever they wanted to do, whatever we wanted to do. And he did that because, number one, he had a good union that negotiated good contracts, ATU, city bus driver. And my mom just was an activist. I mean, she would throw bombs all over the place, and they would stick sometimes. And she was able to really nurture my brother and me and teach us and my father about the importance of community and the importance of joining together in a fight, to joining together in a struggle, and standing together in solidarity. If it wasn't for government, especially in the urban areas, in these major cities, if it wasn't for the manufacturing base that has left a lot of these cities, then you would not have had the migration that you had of African Americans coming from the south into the north and getting good-paying jobs and being able to move their families into the middle class. And now there's a threat that that's not going to happen. I mean, that we can't keep those families in the middle class in these urban areas. And that should scare everybody. I mean, that should frighten everybody, because that's not the way it should be. Everybody should have an opportunity to move if they're doing it right, and if they're working hard, and if they're playing by the rules. They should have an opportunity, just like the top 1%. They should have an opportunity to be able to take care of themselves and their families. And it's getting harder and harder and harder every single day. It really is.
Let's throw it open. Any subject. Freedom Hall. You name it. You got 15 more minutes of the President of the Union to ask him whatever the heck you want to ask.
I have a question.
Okay, here's a brave one.
Of all the opponents that you've faced off against, Kasich, Walker, is there one for you that is the most personal and like until the day that you step down, you were going to stick it to this one person? Like, is there one? I know you've had Nutter. I mean, you've had plenty of opportunities. Is there just one that really sticks
The
in
most
your craw?
personal?
And do you see, and second question, do you see them as getting kind of nastier and more targeted on working people than than the opponents you faced 20 years ago? Is it a different breed of opponent?
I guess the one that I take most personal, because I've had to sit down and try to bang some sense into his head, and he didn't get it, and then he ended up lying about the direction that he was going to take, is Nutter in Philadelphia. He's a lowlife. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. He doesn't get it. He does things his own way, won't listen to anybody else. If you don't agree with him, then you're wrong. And he has, based upon his policies in Philadelphia and us not getting a contract for over 5 years, more of our members who work for the city have moved into poverty than ever before, while they're working for the city. And I think he should take complete blame on that, because he's what we call the 1% mayor. I mean, he'll throw out tax breaks to the corporations, and he refuses to help the communities within Philadelphia that are trying to play by the rules every single day. I mean, clearly, Walker, although I didn't have the personal contact that I had with Walker that I've had with Nutter. So I guess that's why I'm taking it a little bit more personally, because he had a way out and he chose not to do it, Nutter. But clearly, Walker, he destroyed our union in Wisconsin to the point now where we're, 40,000 members less, Steve?
More than.
Where we don't have collective bargaining, where we really don't have the right to even represent our members in the state where we were born, in the early 1930s. And, he took it from us. He took our voice, stole our voices away from us. And, we've just got our folks in Wisconsin, I know, they're tired, they're frustrated, but we just got to figure out ways to keep them pumped up, because the union will be back in Wisconsin, make no mistake about it. It's going to take some time. But we'll be back. But I think for the most personal, I've had dealings with a whole bunch of mayors and governors. Coleman Young, but you could deal with him. He wouldn't lie to you. Cuss you out. But if he reached a deal with you, then he reached a deal with you. But Nutter will do anything at any time that affects so many people in a negative kind of way. What was the second part?
I was just curious if they are more emboldened now, kind of by a post-2010 environment than you might have seen previously 10 or 20
I think Walker's emboldened. I think that, to the point where he's thinking about running for president. He's running around the country saying that this is the way that you got to deal with the public sector unions and public employees. And, I had take a couple lumps, but look at it now. And unfortunately, Doug can correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't appear that we have a strong candidate that's going to run against him, and he's going to get reelected.
But you do have
Do you believe
to,
that?
There's a candidate now.
Sorry, Doug.
Mary Burke, former executive of Trek Bicycles.
Yeah. And
who- Well, we haven't seen polling yet. But his numbers are you know, they're not great. You know, he's still polarized. I mean, he's basically exactly where he was at the recall, which is, yeah, it's +4, but that, you know, it's +4. You know, it's not,
But it
you know.
goes back before Walker though, too. I mean, it really when Reagan took on PATCO.
Thank you, Ronald
Yeah.
Reagan. Let's give him some credit here.
Okay, to put a bullseye on public employees.
Right. And Walker compares himself now to FDR. It was his latest.
Yeah, it's-
I think a lot of these guys feel that in their minds that they're doing the right thing. And they're ideologues. I mean, but they've never, I don't think they've ever lived it. And they've never felt what suffering is all about and how you had to pull yourself up from the bootstraps. A lot of these folks, I guess, have done that and then they've forgotten where they've come from. But you should never forget where you came from. You should never forget that you should always be willing to help other people to get to where you want to be or where you are.
But Steve makes a good point about Reagan, because that was when the era of union busting
Started.
was ushered in. We might, there's a resource in town that we might want to use in this class, even though it's not directly about AFSCME as such. But Joseph McCartan, who teaches at Georgetown, he's written the book on the PATCO strike and on the implications of it for public sector unionism. And we might even want to have him come in here and give that story, and then, draw it out as to how he sees it having an impact on our union's subsequent history. I think that might be valuable. So I'm going to mark that down for a future class. Yes, Michael. Two Michaels. One Michael. You go, Michael, first.
You mentioned Reagan, and then we've had the 94 revolution with Gingrich. How do you feel that sizes up to the current crop of Republicans? And
I don't think that I've ever seen the viciousness of the attacks that we're faced with in my years that I've been with AFSCME, and that's going on 36 years now. I mean, it is just plain vicious and poisonous, and I think these are some of the most, if not the most difficult times that we've had to deal with. I can't think of the times that were more difficult, simply because of just the confrontations and the level of attacks that our people are under every single day. I mean, it's tough out there. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I really haven't. But that doesn't stop us from doing what we've got to do. And should, in some weird kind of way, I see, and I travel across the country, you guys see that, I see a new level of engagement and a new level of activism. I know you've still got a lot of folks that don't want to be a part of the union, don't want to be active with the union. But I'm seeing a growing sense of folks that are ready to fight, that are ready to mobilize and be engaged in a battle, because it's happening to them and it's happening to their families. And I mean, at one time, I think that folks would say, well, it can happen to Joe living down the street here, but it's never going to touch me. It's never going to affect me. Well, it is. It is. And I think that causes a reaction. We've just got to harness that energy and develop a plan and develop a strategy, both as far as organizing, grassroots organizing, a political and legislative strategy, and harness that energy that's out there. But these are the worst times I think that I've experienced since I've been in AFSCME. What do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But it's going to get better, Lee.
It is.
Michael?
Yeah, I think you may have answered my question to a large degree with your last comments there, but I guess my question was, have you noticed these ideologues, are they operating in a vacuum, or are they corresponding and reacting to changes in how the public or how the culture views unions? And have you noticed any difference over the decades in how regular people view us or view unions if they're not part of it 10 years, 20 years ago, or now.
Well, I think there was a study that came out a couple of weeks ago that showed that the feeling of the average citizen about unions is actually on the upswing. And I think that's a direct correlation with what's happening to people who aren't in unions also, who are getting beaten and battered every single day. But you do have these ideologues, and they are willing to do anything at any time. And they don't compromise. I mean, they do not compromise. And I have just never seen anything like this where they're willing to jump off the cliff and take everybody with them. And hope that they can land in a lifeboat and everybody else lands on the cliffs. But they're willing to do it. They're willing to do it. I mean, you look at what's happening in the House, right now. I mean, September is going to be a wild month. September and October. You've got immigration reform. You've got the sequester. You've got the budget. You've got the debt. I mean, you got all these things that are going to be coming together. And right now, these folks are crazy. And I don't see any change. I mean, I don't know how they're going to be able to deal with this. I really don't, because you have these folks that are in the House that they will hold up their mothers and fathers. I mean, it's just amazing to me. It's bad. But I'm convinced that they will feel our wrath sooner or later. They will feel our wrath.
You get the last word.
Okay.
Well, maybe not the last word, the last question.
So I'm just curious about your opinion about the fast food strikes, and if you see them as kind of a missed opportunity to really dig in and develop and cultivate some leaders in these fast food workers, or if they're really just raising kind of the profile and making the everyday person say, oh, we can organize, this is what happens if we come together. Because the realities of forming a union are pretty low, right, as far as those workers coming together and being able to form a union.
I don't think it's a missed opportunity. I think that it's good that it's happening, and I think that we've got to be supportive of their efforts. I think it's very close. I mean, just when you had when you're having the fast food workers do this, and they're getting some support from other unions, but it's got to be viewed as their fight. It's got to be viewed as their struggle. When you had Occupy, come to the forefront, we had to be very careful. In fact, it would have been a big mistake for us to link ourselves so closely with them, because they would have run away from us, because they wanted this, to be their fight and their struggle. And they didn't want to be connected to big labor, if you want to call it that. I think that those kinds of actions are very helpful for us, because it raises a level of awareness of people regarding what the plight of the average worker who's trying to play by the rules every single day, what that plight is. And I don't think that we have to be directly connected to every single fight. I think we've got to be supportive. And then I think we've got to think of ways in which we can develop some kinds of relationships. That's not like we're trying to take it over, okay? But we're supporting what they're trying to do. And I think that that's a plus for labor, and I think that would be a plus for them. So I don't view it as a missed opportunity right now. I mean, you've got to nurture it, and let's see how it grows. Sooner or later, you're going to have unions going in, I would think, into the fast food industry. You've got it happening now, and they're going to start organizing those workers. I think this is a stepping stone.
Well, guys, let's give Lee some real thanks.